deserves justice. Okay. Christine, Charlie, thank you, yes. Black History Month is the celebration of African Americans who have contributed to America's development in some significant way. It's also a time to reflect and to look at the ongoing struggle of racial and socioeconomic equity. This past year, we saw clearly how far we have come and how far we have yet to go to find the balance of what it looks like to be treated fairly in a country like America. This past year, we saw clearly how far we have yet to go for human rights and dignity for all people. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice are the examples of human beings who were tragically and unjustly ill-treated by other human beings. It's disturbing when evil is ever present, and some people do not see or even speak in objection because it has not happened to them. Justice, I think of justice. When I think of God, I think of justice. I think of the God of justice, where Amos said, "But let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an everlasting stream." Justice is the attribute of God that speaks to his holiness. It speaks to who he is, the essence of his character, his person, his nature of being pure, uncontaminated, and separate from the evil of the world. In this sense, this makes God the one and only righteous judge of all the earth. And the spirit by which he judges is just, good, and fair for everyone. This is the spirit that needs to be adopted by all people, as we are people made in the image of God. Over the past year, we have seen the injustice in America revealed. It's shown how important it is to emphasize and speak out against human injustice. We are from one God who has made all of us from one race, the human race, in which we all equally belong with the freedoms and rights that come therein. I remember what Paul was in Athens arguing on the hill of Mars, talking to the Greeks about that God and who that God is, in whom we live, move, and have our very being. Paul said that we are made from one. All nations have come from one, and that one is Adam. From one means Adam, as written in Genesis, "Let us make man in our image and our likeness." Adam is the ancestor of all mankind. God made every nation from one man, Adam. We all come from the same God. And Paul says we are God's offspring. When I think about Dr. King, I think about what he asked in one of his speeches. Where do we go from here? To chaos or community? Looking forward, what kind of voice should Christians have to speak out for racial, social, righteousness, and justice anywhere in the world? What will you or we do to educate, inform, and motivate people to engage, as John Lewis would say, good and necessary trouble, to bring men from the biblical perspective, from God's perspective, to bring men to repentance? Yes, I said repentance. Repentance, because no sinful man can honestly be just. To get there, it's going to require active engagement. Again, in the words of Dr. King, he called on people to engage. As he said, human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Even a superficial look at history, as he stated, reveals that no social advance rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle. And he talked about the tireless exertion and passion. But he also said, without effort, time itself becomes an ally of the insurgent and primitive forces of irrational emotionalism and social destruction. This is no time for apathy or complacency. This is the time for vigorous and positive action. And so it is that I'm here today to say, in recognition of Black History Month, one thing I want to ask, do you vote, speak out, encourage others to vote and speak out for the cause of change? I hear Amos talking about the nations, the human injustices perpetrated, not only by the Jewish people, but by other surrounding nations. And it tells us that God is universal in his judgment of man's sins against man. He calls out moral, social, and political corruption in Amos's prophecy for divine justice. He called out Syria for their inhumane treatment of captives, with beating them with spikes. He called out Philistia for slave trafficking and Phoenicia for slave trading. He called out Edom, the descendants of Esau, Jacob, Esau, we've been talking about, as perpetual enmity and hatred for their brother. He called the Ammonites out as they ripped up pregnant women as they invaded other countries just so they could expand their borders. Moab is another nation he calls out for burning the bones of someone to make lime, or people to make lime just because they couldn't kill them themselves. God calls out these injustices. And most importantly, he calls out the people that are supposed to be the people of God for turning against his word, turning against his law, and believing something else, believing lies, believing in idolatry. It's those kinds of things. When we abort the teaching of God, that's when we are left to our own devices. That's when we become inhumane. That's when we become unjust. And that's when we begin to treat other people like they don't deserve to be sharing the same air that we breathe. And so the result of turning away from God and turning to idolatry for Israel, this was their hardness of heart, their immorality, and their disregard for the poor and moral conduct. It sounds like America, the America we live in, the attitude and the way people are thinking about other people and the way people treat other people. But if we're going to get out of this, we need to continue to recognize that God is a just God. And Amos called for justice as God sent him to indict those people who mistreated even their enemies with no human dignity. God addresses injustice everywhere and simply judges it as sin. So it's nothing new. It's nothing new as America prides herself on being a great nation, a beacon of light for the world to imitate. Yes, I've heard the question, is this America? More in recent days than any other time I can remember. The answer is yes, this is America. And yes, America stands judged just like any other country that stands in injustice against God and the people of God. Black History Month is a time for celebration. And yes, I think the church needs to celebrate Black History Month so that we can remind people that it's important to know what other people are suffering. But not only that, so that we can have a voice to speak out from all corners of the faith of Christianity, from all corners of society, from all corners of where we live and where we have life. Call it out and take the time to celebrate the changes made that bring us closer to God in our human treatment of one another. Celebrate the name of our holy and righteous God. Celebrate what it means to be Black in America. Celebrate what it means to be an American. Celebrate what it means to be a human being in the spirit of a loving and mighty and just God.